police encountered this stolen G-Wagon. 3 times. Then, 2 innocent people were killed. A stolen Mercedes G-Wagon. 4 young people inside. 3 separate encounters with police. And by the end of the morning, 2 innocent people were dead. What happened in Mays Landing, New Jersey, was initially described as an hours-long police chase. But the emerging timeline is more complicated than that. Court records indicate police encountered the stolen SUV multiple times over a period of roughly 4 hours. Officers tried to stop it. The vehicle got away. It appeared again. Police tried again. And during the final encounter, officers lost sight of the Mercedes. Only minutes later, they came upon a devastating head-on crash. Inside the other vehicle were 67-year-old Alice Stilwell and her longtime partner, 54-year-old Robert Barr, Jr. Neither survived. Now an 18-year-old and 3 juveniles are facing serious charges. The New Jersey Attorney General's office is conducting its own investigation, and investigators are trying to reconstruct exactly what happened during those final hours. Because this was not simply a stolen car case anymore. It had become a tragedy that ended 2 lives. And the timeline begins before sunrise. NB. The first encounter, Saturday, August 22nd, starts in Longport, New Jersey. According to court records reported by NBC 10 Philadelphia, police first encountered the Mercedes G-Wagon at approximately 3:42 in the morning. The luxury SUV had been stolen from a family in Longport. Police attempted to stop it, but the vehicle did not stop. It got away. Authorities then alerted other law enforcement agencies in the area. At that point, officers knew they were looking for a stolen high-end SUV. But this is where one important distinction needs to be made. Some early reports described what followed as an hours-long police pursuit. The available records suggest something different. Police were not necessarily chasing directly behind the Mercedes continuously from 3:42 in the morning until the crash. Instead, the SUV apparently disappeared and then repeatedly reappeared in different places. That distinction matters, because over the next several hours, police would encounter it again and again, until it was more than 3 hours later. The morning continues. Traffic increases. People begin their Saturday routines, and the stolen Mercedes is still somewhere in Atlantic County. Then, at approximately 7:18 a.m., police encounter it again. According to court documents cited by NB10, Egg Harbor Township officers spotted the Mercedes in a Walmart parking lot. Once again, police attempted to stop it. Once again, the driver fled. The SUV disappeared for a second time. Now, consider what investigators were dealing with. A stolen vehicle had already refused to stop for one police department before dawn. Hours later, another department had located it, and the driver had again escaped. But the most important encounter was still ahead. 7:46 a.m. At approximately 7:46 that morning, Hamilton Township Police located the Mercedes again. This time it was reportedly near another SUV at a residential complex. Police attempted another stop. Both vehicles took off. Hamilton Township officers followed, but they soon lost sight of the stolen Mercedes. This detail may become one of the most closely examined parts of the investigation. Police no longer had the SUV in view, and roughly 6 minutes later, according to the court record timeline reported by NB10, officers found it again. But this time, the Mercedes was wrecked, and 2 people in another vehicle had been killed. And as does the crash. Surveillance footage from the area captured the impact. The stolen G-Wagon entered the path of an oncoming sedan near Route 50 and 3rd Street in Mays Landing. The collision was head-on. The force of the crash sent the smaller car toward a nearby gas station. Video from the scene shows just how violent the impact was. Police arrived almost immediately, but for Alice Stilwell and Robert Barr, Jr., there was nothing that could be done. Both died. They were not involved in the theft. They were not part of the attempt to escape police. They were simply traveling through May's Landing that morning, and within seconds, their lives were over. The 4 occupants of the Mercedes survived. Authorities say they attempted to run from the crash scene. Police quickly took them into custody. One was identified as 18-year-old Nashawn Brown of Atlantic City. The other 3 were juveniles, so authorities have not publicly released their names. And with the suspects in custody, investigators began trying to answer a much larger question. How had the events of the previous 4 hours ended here? Who was driving? Early reporting left some uncertainty over who had been behind the wheel when the collision occurred. But newer reporting based on court records provides an important development. Prosecutors have accused Nashawn Brown of driving the Mercedes at the time of the deadly crash. Brown later appeared before a judge from jail with his arm in a sling. According to NBC 10, court records also state that marijuana was recovered after the crash, and that police believed Brown appeared to be under the influence of drugs or alcohol. Those remain allegations. The investigation is continuing, and Brown, like the other defendants, is presumed innocent unless proven guilty in court. But prosecutors have already filed several significant charges. The charges. Brown and the 3 juveniles have been charged in connection with the stolen vehicle and the events surrounding the crash. The initial charges include conspiracy involving aggravated assault while joyriding. They also include conspiracy to commit joyriding, conspiracy to elude police, and conspiracy involving receiving a stolen motor vehicle. Brown faces an additional first-degree charge of employing a juvenile in the commission of a crime. Authorities have also made clear that these may not be the final charges. The Atlantic County Prosecutor's Office says the investigation is still active, and that additional charges could be filed as more evidence is reviewed. Brown was being held at the Atlantic County Justice Facility. 2 of the juveniles remained in custody in the latest reports, while another had been released following a superior court decision. But there is another part of this investigation that does not focus only on the people inside the Mercedes. It focuses on the police response, and why the Attorney General is investigating. The New Jersey Attorney General's office quickly announced that its Office of Public Integrity and Accountability was investigating the fatal collision. That announcement is significant, but it should not be misunderstood. An Attorney General investigation does not automatically mean officers did something wrong. New Jersey law requires the Attorney General's office to investigate deaths that occur during certain encounters involving law enforcement officers acting in their official capacity. The purpose is to independently reconstruct what happened. That can include examining police communications, vehicle locations, dash camera or body camera recordings, if available, the timing of the pursuit, when officers began following the Mercedes, when they lost sight of it, and how much time passed before the crash. Under New Jersey law, these investigations are ultimately presented to a grand jury to determine whether the evidence supports criminal charges against any officer involved. Again, that does not mean investigators have concluded police caused the crash. At this stage, they have not announced such a finding. But the existence of the investigation tells us something important. Authorities are not examining only what happened inside the stolen SUV. They are examining the entire chain of events. Nantes, a difficult decision for police. Police pursuits create an extremely difficult problem for officers. If police do not pursue a dangerous fleeing vehicle, the driver may escape and continue putting the public at risk. But if officers chase at high speed, the pursuit itself can create additional danger to drivers, pedestrians, and police. New Jersey's statewide use of force policy places restrictions on high-speed pursuits and requires officers to consider the risks involved. Longport Police Chief Ray Bergen described that calculation while discussing this case. If a driver refuses to stop, officers have to weigh the risk against the potential benefit of continuing a pursuit. And according to the latest timeline, officers in this case did lose sight of the Mercedes before the deadly collision. That fact will almost certainly receive close attention. Investigators will want to know exactly where the police vehicles were, how fast everyone was traveling, whether emergency lights or sirens were active, whether the pursuit had officially been terminated or officers simply lost visual contact, and whether anything during those final minutes contributed to what happened. Until the investigation is complete, those questions should remain questions. But the fact that the Mercedes had already escaped police more than once makes the timeline even more troubling. And met 3 chances to stop the SUV. Look again at the sequence. Around 3:42 a.m., Longport police attempted a stop. The Mercedes fled. Around 7:18 a.m., Egg Harbor Township Police encountered the vehicle near a Walmart. It fled again. Around 7:46 a.m., Hamilton Township Police encountered it near a residential complex. It fled a 3rd time. Then, only minutes later, came the crash. That is what makes this case so difficult to ignore. For hours, the stolen SUV was moving through the same region. Multiple departments knew about it. Multiple officers tried to stop it. And yet, the incident did not end until 2 people who apparently had nothing to do with any of it were killed. St. Alice and Bob. It is easy for a story like this to become dominated by the Mercedes, by the surveillance video, by the police pursuit, by the ages of the people arrested. But 2 names should not disappear beneath those details: Alice Stilwell and Robert Barr Jr. Alice was 67. Robert was 54. They lived in Egg Harbor Township. Family accounts describe Alice as a mother, grandmother, and long-time hairstylist who had spent years building relationships with her clients. She was approaching retirement, but had reportedly struggled to completely step away from the work and people she loved. She also enjoyed creating artwork and selling it at local markets. Robert had been her partner for more than 2 decades. According to Alice's obituary, they enjoyed simple things together: cooking, farmers markets, gardening, time at home, and their cats. They were building the ordinary life that most people never expect to lose in an instant. Then, on one Saturday morning in Mays Landing, they encountered a stolen SUV traveling in the opposite direction. Their families are now planning funerals. And yes, another troubling detail. NBC 10 also reports that Brown was already facing charges in 2 other cases from the previous 2 months. At least one of those cases allegedly involved another stolen vehicle. Those are separate allegations and have not been proven, but they are likely to become part of the larger public discussion surrounding this case, because people will inevitably ask whether warning signs were already there, and whether anything could have prevented what happened on Route 50. For investigators, however, speculation is not enough. They need evidence. Waxu, the stolen car problem. This crash also comes against a broader concern about vehicle theft along the Jersey Shore. Longport police said several high-end vehicles had recently been stolen in the area. Police have repeatedly urged residents to lock their vehicles and keep key fobs secured inside their homes. Modern luxury cars can be extremely difficult to steal without access to a key or electronic signal. But when keys are left inside vehicles, or close enough for thieves to access them, an expensive SUV can disappear within moments. That does not shift responsibility away from the people who steal vehicles. But police say vehicle owners can reduce opportunities by locking cars, removing key fobs, and securing them inside the home. Because a stolen vehicle is not always just a property crime. Sometimes it becomes the vehicle used in another crime. Sometimes it becomes a part of a police pursuit. And sometimes, as this case demonstrates, people who have nothing to do with the theft pay the highest possible price. Shigi, what happens next? The case is now moving along 2 tracks. Prosecutors are pursuing criminal charges against Brown and the 3 juveniles. At the same time, the New Jersey Attorney General's office is examining the circumstances surrounding the police encounter and fatal collision. Investigators may review surveillance video from nearby businesses. police radio traffic, body camera footage, vehicle data, witness statements, and the sequence of events during those final minutes. Prosecutors have already warned that the charges could change as more evidence becomes available. That means the legal story is far from finished, and several major questions remain unanswered. Exactly how fast was the stolen Mercedes traveling? What happened after Hamilton Township Police first saw it at approximately 7:46? How long did officers follow it? What caused them to lose sight of it? And what happened inside the Mercedes during the minutes immediately before the collision? Those answers could determine how prosecutors ultimately describe this case. And the 6 minutes that matter most. 4 hours separate the first police encounter from the deadly crash. But investigators may ultimately focus most closely on about 6 minutes. The minutes after Hamilton Township Police encountered the Mercedes for the final time. The minutes when the SUV fled. The minutes when officers lost sight of it. And the minutes before Alice Stilwell and Robert Barr Jr. happened to be driving toward the same intersection. For Alice and Bob, there was no warning. There was no connection to the stolen car. No involvement in what had happened earlier that morning. They were simply in the wrong place at the worst possible moment. 4 young people are now facing serious accusations. 2 families are grieving. And investigators are trying to reconstruct how a stolen Mercedes that police encountered 3 separate times remained on the road long enough for an ordinary Saturday morning to end in tragedy. The criminal charges are still allegations. The Attorney General's investigation is still underway, and until both investigations are complete, there are important questions that cannot yet be answered. But one fact is already beyond dispute. Alice Stilwell and Robert Barr Jr. left home that morning, expecting an ordinary day. They never came back.